Bit of housekeeping, this meeting is being live streamed and your attendance is accepting that you may appear on it. And when you do speak, please switch on your microphone and then switch off once you've finished speaking. I think this is the first Transport Committee where our Chief Executive has joined us, Amy. So I'd like to welcome Amy to the committee and offer a few words if you wish.
Well, I've achieved on pressure item 1, which was operating the microphone system, so we'll probably end on that high, but lovely to see you all this morning and delighted to be here for my first Transport Committee. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome. Any apologies for absence? Have we had any? No?
No apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest? Marvellous, we're on a roll. Minutes of the last meeting. Is everybody happy with those minutes? Any queries or comments? Marvellous. Public participation. So I think we've received lots of questions. Most of them will be answered in writing, and those questioners who have attended can present their questions to the Mayor. So we'll start with Miss Grocott, if she's here. If you'd like to come to the lectern and turn the mic on.
Thank you. So at bus user meetings in Chesterfield, Belper and Matlock, many concerns have been raised about the accuracy of real-time information displays. It is understood that these cost £7,000 for each unit. Despite the cost of this technology, bus times can fall off the screen without a bus appearing, leaving bus users unsure whether the bus is going to arrive, whether it is left early or whether it has been cancelled. Recently, a display showed a delay of 17 minutes to a Trent Barton service to Matlock. The bus users began walking to stay warm, missing the bus, which was in fact on time. A bus user from Belper said, as well as purchase and installation, there are running and maintenance costs, all for something which is worse than useless if it can't be trusted and causes confusion. With government BSIP funding for 2025 to 2026 now allocated directly to EMCCA, does the Mayor intend to use any of the capital BSIP budget to invest in further RTI units? And if so, what steps will she take to ensure that RTI units give accurate information and that public money is not wasted?
Thank you for that question, Mayor Clare.
Thank you, Chrissy, for your question, for raising those concerns. And I share your expectation that the bus information system should be wholly reliable if we're to encourage more people to use public transport. I'm pleased to be able to confirm that on this agenda is a report that recommends the allocation of £2 million next year to increase the provision of real-time passenger information displays. The primary reason why real-time displays are not always accurate is the communication system, coupled with the on-bus technology. It should go without saying that accurate information is a must-have, and as EMCCA takes on the direct responsibility for bus-based public transport in the coming months, I will be holding our operators and systems providers to account for the reliability of their technology.
You have a supplementary if you wish.
Derbyshire County Council recently told a bus user that RTI does not work in the Hope Valley because of the hills, and until they are moved, it won't work. He was told that the people all over the country are looking at this and that there is no current solution. Advertising our buses has to play a huge part in the modal shift to public transport now needed to get to net zero. All of us here know how powerful advertising is. Can I ask that going forwards, all bus stops are used as free advertising, displaying travel maps and, crucially, hard copies of timetables for all services?
Well, I agree with Derbyshire County Council that we're not going to be able to move the peaks. So On that basis, we have to find another solution that helps people to reliably use buses and encourages them to do so. As part of the longer-term Mayor's Transport Plan, we will take responsibility for the bus stops and those shelters. And when we do so, we can certainly look at the points that you've raised about how we use them to the best effect to encourage more people to use buses by providing more reliable information and greater information. And I'm particularly keen to use those to encourage people to get around and visit our local region, particularly if they are visitors from outside the region or outside of the area. So I think there's a huge amount of potential in that. As you know, we're at the very beginning of this process. At the moment, legally, we don't take on the passenger transport responsibilities until April of next year, but we're starting that transition process from April of this year, and you will see more of that information in the documents that we're discussing today and that should go to our board meeting next week. I hope that you will bear with us, continue to encourage us and support us as we try to provide better, more integrated public transport across our region.
Thank you for the questions. Mr. Widdowson, are you here?
Hello. The region has received 66 million in total, 55 million capital and 11 million revenue from the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. This will be used to fund major transport projects in the region, and proposals for which projects should be funded will be discussed at the Transport and Digital Connectivity Committee today. Please can the Mayor confirm that no money will be spent on projects that increase carbon emissions, including large highway projects that result in additional traffic and carbon, and instead will be used to further the objectives to provide a sustainable and integrated travel network across the region?
Mayor?
Thank you, David, for your question. The report on the Transport Investment Programme on this agenda sets out in some detail the funding allocations proposed for next financial year. Our approach to the allocation of funding has had to be pragmatic, given the short time that we've had since knowing what the government would be awarding to this region. So as we mature as an organisation, one of the ways we allocate investment will be in line with its climate impact, delivering schemes which will be within the region's future science-based targets. In the meantime, we've worked closely with our constituent authorities to develop a comprehensive package of investment that tackles some of the biggest challenges we face, such as network resilience, climate change and connectivity. I believe our programme is deliverable in this first year and demonstrates to government that we have the capability to make improvements swiftly and effectively. As a summary, this programme covers network efficiency and resilience, including work towards preventing further damage from flooding, and includes bus priority, bus station improvements, and supporting the electrification of bus fleets. Importantly, it also includes active and sustainable travel schemes to make cycling, walking, and scooting safer and more attractive. As we get greater certainty over future funding from government and are able to put in place a clear long-term transport strategy, we'll be able to direct funding to more projects that will ultimately deliver the inclusive and sustainable growth we need to drive the region forward.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes. Item 8A for this meeting on transport investment, it shows that the Mayor is going to spend over 13 million on various major highway projects, including investigation works as part of the 25-26 CRSTS settlement. Is the Mayor satisfied that these projects will not increase carbon emissions in the region, or that more sustainable options for these projects are not available?
So we know that some of these infrastructure and highway projects are absolutely essential for us, particularly if we want to encourage more people to travel by bus. we need to ensure that we have that infrastructure across our region. We will look at all of these issues because we want them to be sustainable across our region. And where there's an impact in some areas, we will look at how that can be mitigated through our actions in other areas. And that's why it's really important to me as the Mayor that as we make decisions about achieving sustainable transport across our region, that we do so with all of these implications in mind. One of the reasons that I've recently appointed the Sustainable Travel Ambassador, Alan Simpson, is again to ensure that all of these views are brought forward as we make our decisions.
Thank you, thank you. There are 6 other questions that they'll be issued a written response as the questioners aren't here. Items. If your name's on the list. Okay, yep, go for it. Yeah. Could you just give us your name, please? Thank you. Yeah, first one. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. At the January meeting of the EMCCA Transport and Connectivity Committee, the Mayor argued that one of the reasons she wasn't pursuing bus franchising was because most of the areas undertaking franchising had public transport authorities, so had a head start on staffing, unlike EMCCA. And in a recent webinar, Redesigning Rural Bus Networks, Can Franchising Work in Rural Areas?, the expert speakers agreed that it was not a valid reason for rural authorities to say they didn't have the capacity to implement bus franchising, and the recent government bus funding settlement included funding for capacity building. Does the Mayor have any objection to using some of the existing 16 full-time equivalent transport team, or seconding staff from other Labour combined authorities, or hiring new staff to investigate and implement franchising?
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your question. And also thank you for presenting me, I think on behalf of all of you and to the committee, your Better Buses biscuits, which look very good. There are numerous reasons why I'm not yet asking EMCCA to pursue franchising and instead to focus on the enhanced partnership route. Firstly, this will deliver improvements faster. We have good relationships with our bus operators and believe that we can use these as a foundation to shaping a region-wide network. It also gives us more certainty of the outcomes over the next 3 to 5 years. As the enhanced partnership is binding, we can enforce outputs and outcomes that are not achieved as promised. The East Midlands area has not had an integrated network to date, and I want to ensure that we design that with the operators who have important expertise to bring to the table. This doesn't mean that franchising is off the table indefinitely, but I will not initiate it unthinkingly. This is very much a time for watching and learning, and I have been watching and learning from other combined authorities and mayors, and it is a slow process, and I want to be able to see what we can deliver quickly. Different authorities are in different starting positions, and I'm watching to make sure that obviously we will look at other options if they become necessary. Ultimately, I'm conscious that the costs of investigating franchising and preparing an assessment are significant. The government recently provided EMCCA with £125,000 for capacity building, but West Midlands Combined Authority have budgeted £1.5 million, and South Yorkshire Combined Authority are looking at around £3 million. Even if franchising was a desired outcome, the funding to deliver it is uncertain, and it would take at least 3 to 5 years before our residents saw the planned benefits. The funding we've received and the staff resources we have can be spent on passenger and stakeholder priorities with tangible outcomes, rather than the delivery of a process which considers franchising.
Do you have a supplementary?
Please. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Clare. You say you don't want to initiate franchising unthinkingly, but without evidence either way to know whether an enhanced partnership or franchising is the better option, you are initiating enhanced partnership unthinkingly. And appreciate that there are costs associated with an assessment, but the budget today shows that the the combined authority is committing millions, like 2.5 million for a study, a ground investigation study on a road, which will likely increase traffic and carbon, for which the funding is also uncertain, and which also won't be delivered for many years. So we're not asking you to commit to franchising straight away, but simply to do an assessment of all the options, including franchising, as other Labour and Tory combined authorities of mayors have done. And if you wait until you see what the outcome is from the enhanced partnership, it's either works as desired or the bus services may improve with a bigger public subsidy, but you still won't know whether it would not have improved more with a franchising option. So do you agree that public transport, it's a public service that receives a large public subsidy, and that bus timetables, routes and fares are better governed by a public body such as yours rather than private profit-seeking companies? Thank you.
So I agree that public transport is absolutely essential for us to be able to deliver an ambition for this region, for access to good jobs, to skills, to entertainment, and to health services. And we must be able to deliver that. What I don't want to do is to delay that by pursuing an option at this stage that might not be right for us. And I say might not be right for us because I think that on enhanced partnerships, we can deliver more and much quicker than we would on franchising. The second thing I would say is that the Labour government is bringing in new legislation in due course that will provide a range of different tools within the box that combined authorities can use with passenger transport authorities can use. We will always keep in mind what those may be. And that is why franchising will never be off the table. But my first starting point is to ensure that as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, we are delivering better buses. And that is more important to me at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Just before I move on to item 6, can I check if there's any other member of the public who's submitted a question and is here to hear the reply? Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6 then, which is the Transport Transition Plan. Peter, you're going to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to introduce this report by running through a few slides. Rather than going through the report line by line, I've sort of summarised the content of the report in some slides, so hopefully that will be helpful, Chair, to you and the committee to quickly get through the content and open it up for discussions and questions. So I'd like to start just by setting out in a number of bullet points why change, why this transition plan, because I think that's something that hasn't perhaps been fairly and squarely addressed recently, albeit it was some time ago, about a year ago. So it's worth sometimes reminding ourselves why we're going about the transition process. And it's fundamentally to create a single approach to bus provision across the EMCCA area, to exert greater influence over bus operators, with bus operators, but in partnership, through a consolidated and enhanced partnership approach. At the moment, we have 4 enhanced partnerships across the 4-authority EMCCA region, and consolidating that into one will give us more traction within the overall discussion with bus operators. It's also to maximise the investment value that we get from the funding from government. EMCCA now receives the funding directly from government for buses, but also for wider transport investment. And to maximise that, having the bus responsibilities in one place at EMCCA is the best way to maximise that opportunity. There are also ticketing incentives that need to be looked at on a regional or EMCCA-wide basis, particularly for offers like for young people for lower price travel. And that's just part of the overall approach to coordinating services and coordinating the public transport offer at a strategic level that EMCCA would bring. The other advantage of doing this on a regional basis is to provide a customer focus, a more consistent approach to the provision of information. We've heard from the questions this morning about different ways of providing information, real-time and paper timetables, to bus passengers and potential bus passengers. And there's a provision within the enhanced partnership for a customer charter, and having a consolidated single customer charter to provide a focus for our customer work, I think is really important to make those improvements. There's an opportunity for better transport interchanges with the investment to roll out best practice, and there's an awful lot of good practice and best practice within our region already, both within the authorities but also within our operators, some of whom are award-winning. And there's a real opportunity to use the leverage of the partnership and a single partnership to maximise the value of that. Providing consistent services to common standards, I think, is also a significant step forward. But also doing things on a bigger scale potentially could generate economies that then could be reinvested back into service provision overall. And finally, greater connectivity. It's a really important issue particularly around rural areas, as we've heard, and ensuring that we've got that combination of different types of service being offered and provided across the region. So what is transferring? Essentially, it's contracts, budgets and staff, but in the categories in these 6 bullet points below that, which is local bus services, where we've got bus service contracts, and there's over 150 across the region at the moment, and managing the performance of those services. The overall approach and policy provision for buses through a single bus service improvement plan, BSIP, but also, as I said previously, the enhanced partnerships and consolidating that to deliver a better policy approach and funding offer to invest in the region. I talked about zebra bids there, that's zero emission buses. There's an opportunity, I think, again, to make stronger bids to government for specific zebra funding. We've been successful, and some of our authorities have been very successful in securing funding for zero emission electric buses in our region already. In terms of infrastructure, the provision of bus stops and shelters, bus station management and park and ride is something that will be transferred to EMCCA under this transition plan. That's the management, not necessarily the ownership of those things. To provide good, strong, consistent planning advice into local planning authorities in terms of how we can get more bus operations and bus services provided as part of development proposals, I think, is a really important factor. There's an awful lot of development planned across the region, housing and employment growth, but to be sustainable and to be inclusive, we need to ensure that there's effective bus provision alongside it. And concessions and ticketing, again, this is more about standardising and making sure that there's a consistent, even approach across the region. And similarly, as I've mentioned previously, around customer service and data management, having a single point of data knowledge in the region to enable us to then produce the customer-focused information that we need. So what's not transferring, just quickly, tram operations, they're not part of this consideration, this transition plan. The tram itself is part of a longer-term PFI funding arrangement, and the tram operations are not considered to be part of something that transfers into EMCCA at this point. Home to school transport and adult social care transport, to the extent that they're not provided by a contracted service, would not transfer. So the specification for those services wouldn't transfer, although the provision of them might if there are contracts for other services, or more conventional bus service contracts that do serve an adult care or home to school function. And in-house fleets will not be transferring either under these transition proposals. So how are we going to do it? Contract novation, that's the legal transfer of contracts that are in place with one or more of the authorities at the moment. A public transport contribution, which is the transport levy, and the transfer under TUPE of staff, potentially up to 70 staff from our existing authorities into EMCCA. And what needs to happen to achieve this is quite a lot of work around systems development, which is underway for finance, information and contract management. A lot of legal and procurement work. We'll talk again about the inter-authority agreement between EMCCA and its constituent authorities, extending contracts where it's necessary to do so for service continuity. A lot of organisation planning, integrating a large number of people into EMCCA is a big deal. It takes some organising and some planning and some preparation, and a lot of that is already underway. Engagement and consultation with staff and unions, as well as externally with bus operators, user groups, and so on. So essentially, Chair, the paper you've got before you seeks a number of delegations and decisions, particularly around the principle of the issues that and the functions that are going to transfer. We have had some recent discussions just literally in the last 24 hours around the recommendation in relation to the levy, the transport contribution, and that's recommendation F. And the decision's been taken now by mutual consent to withdraw that recommendation from the list of recommendations you've got. And that's partly because it's acknowledging that there's a role here for the EMCCA board in confirming the public transport contribution ultimately, and there's no need for that to be part of this set of recommendations on this occasion. So we're withdrawing recommendation F on your papers, but the other recommendations stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. I'll now open it up for comments or questions. Councillor Khan.
Yeah, thank you for presenting the report. I'm actually quite keen to understand what the difference is, what progress has been made since the last meeting we had. So you've given us the overview, and that's all welcome, and I think we'd all probably agree that's why we obviously voted for EMCCA and the benefits. But what I'm not clear on is what's actually changed from the previous meeting to this meeting, because we've got a transition date of October. So I'm trying to understand, are we still on, will we still hit that date, or are you potentially on schedule, behind schedule? Because I think that's really important for us to understand, because we want it to be a smooth transition.
Thank you. The short answer is there's a lot of risks around October. We're still very much focused on October. There has been, since the last update meeting in January, there's been a lot of progress across all boards around, particularly around the systems development and making sure that EMCCA is effective at managing the systems within EMCCA, so it's fit for purpose. There's also been a lot more clarity around the staffing and the roles that the staff currently fulfil and how applicable they are to be transferring into EMCCA. And a good deal of work around the legal side as well, and developing the draft heads of terms for the inter-authority agreement, which is still work in progress, but this is an update report. My intention is to keep the focus on October, and I think there's strong cross-authority support for that, recognising though that it's not guaranteed and there's still quite a lot of hurdles to jump over the coming months.
Sorry, yeah, just to probably add then, it'll be really helpful that because in the papers it says heads of terms will be brought to the committee at a future date. It would be really helpful for us if you could put some dates on there, so then we know what you're aiming for, and then that will then reassure us if you're actually on schedule or not.
Yes, I mean the next meeting of this committee is obviously in the next municipal year, so we would expect to bring a paper to that committee. As I say, it's work in progress. We were nearly there, and we were nearly able to bring something today on the heads of terms, but not quite there. And we need to make sure we do it right and get the strong consensus from the authorities. And that's the objective behind that, and the reason why actually we weren't able to bring something today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Certainly welcome this update, and it's signs now that things are starting to move forward. Just really want assurances, if you like, and just to emphasise that we've got some continuity and assurances that there will be continuity of services as the transition takes place, both physically from the actual services operated, but also things like concessionary fares. There's 10,000 odd users across the EMCCA geography. So it's important that basically people, the residents, don't see the join or don't see the gap. That's more, mind the gap. So it's important that that continuity does continue. And I'm sure the Mayor would be disappointed if I didn't mention as well our previous discussions we've taken place in other meetings. I hope she will continue. The Mayor said that she will continue to promote the on-demand services of buses, the NOTS bus on demand that we'll be handing over, which has proved extremely popular. It does actually prompt me to refer to one of the earlier questioners about carbon emissions. In fact, the on-demand service does help reduce those emissions because it takes away the potential of empty buses driving around the countryside emitting exhausts, whereas the on-demand service goes where it's needed and therefore is not unnecessarily emitting extra pollution. So that does help towards reducing carbon emissions. And I suppose, and I think probably Peter's already touched on it to a certain extent, but hopefully we will have be able to see an action plan so that we can be assured that those handover of services will be taking place in a smooth and efficient way.
Thank you, Peter, on the action plan.
Yes, just quickly, you've got an appendix to this report which sets out a timeline for a number of different activities. That is, in effect, the current live plan on a page that we're working to around the readiness for EMCCA to receive the services and the functions. In terms of other reassurances, I've mentioned before about the extension of contracts. There are contracts that potentially would come to an end between now and October, or now at the end of the year, really. That we are working with the relevant authority to get those contracts extended, so there is continuity of service. So as those contracts are passed over to EMCCA, there is no change as far as the public are concerned. Similarly with some of the other, with demand responsive transport and so on that you've mentioned.
Thank you. Councillor Swan?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Oh, thank you, Peter. You know, some excellent work taking place here, and obviously this is a overarching framework, and I'm sure as we start to work through this process that things will have a lot more clarity going forward for all of us in this room. I was really interested to see the fact that we're talking about connectivity, digital connectivity, and one of the questions here today raised about rural connectivity. But what we don't want to do is see urban connectivity missed out of that conversation, because that's extremely important for some of us. And we do have some of the challenges that were raised by the questioner today in urban areas where there are no hills or peaks. So they kind of need to be ironed out to some degree. We also welcome the focus on thinking about strategically about housing developments and infrastructure with regards to transport, because certainly in our community we have an issue where there is a housing development, and I won't go into the detail, but you know, we were unable to put a bus on there because of some of the complications around a development. So really interested to see how we can push that agenda forward as well. I think that's extremely important. Thank you.
Councillor Mellon.
Thank you for the report. A couple of questions. First of all, you talk, Peter, in your presentation about the economies of scale, about having consistency across the region. How are you going to achieve that while also preserving local knowledge? We have a very varied region. You know, in the Nottingham City, we're not experts on demand-led transport, but we're have lots of knowledge about how to have integrated systems. The tram might not be passing across to EMCCA, but it's certainly very much an important part of our integrated system. So how are we going to keep that local knowledge to ensure that the real-time bus signs in the middle of Derbyshire are dealt with by people who understand the region, rather than just having an overall approach? That's my first question. The second one is some of the things that we need to do, I believe, in our region require other authorities to do some work. So one of the things I constantly harp on about is about transport from Nottingham to East Midlands Airport, which is outside of our combined region, but is nevertheless important for jobs and people to be able to get there on public transport rather than getting in their cars. But equally, there's a converse there that actually people in the villages in Rushcliffe might want to have a better transport route into the city, and that would be the same bus or whatever going back and forth. But we have money here allocated to individual constituent authorities, but some of the things that we need to do in the region, and maybe EMCCA can facilitate this, will require partnerships across different regions, and we can't solve that problem in the city by ourselves.
Yes, thank you for those. I think the first one around local knowledge and retaining local knowledge. I mean, part of the benefit of transferring staff in is that we're transferring that knowledge, not only of the geography, but of some of the systems and the knowledge of the routes and the communities that those routes serve, both rural and urban. And I think the trick here really is just to make sure that we're properly harnessing that resource, that expertise, in a way that develops and maximises the best practice and the knowledge that we've got. So we will have real-time information experts within that pool of staff who are transferring in from more than one authority, no doubt, and consolidating that into a real expert team, if you like, around real-time information should help us move forward in the direction we want to move around improving that reliability, working with the providers and with the operators to ensure that that is definitely the sort of exemplar that we aspire to. Similarly with the geography, I recognise that there are some people within the teams in each of the authorities who are real experts on the geography, the ins and outs of particular routes, and that again will be brought in to a single EMCCA team and EMCCA resource. So we're not going to lose that, and certainly I wouldn't want to dilute that knowledge. It's a case of sharing it and scaling it up to a level that would really work for us effectively going forward. The issue around other authorities, and particularly cross-boundary work, is that I think taking forward the overall responsibility for public transport as EMCCA will give us some real clout, some real heft, if you like, within the conversations that we are having with partners, with Leicestershire, with private sector partners like the airport and others just beyond our boundary, to be able to secure the deals and the agreements and the commitments that we need to ensure that the services that are serving our population as well as the populations the other side of the boundaries are retained and enhanced. So that's very much part of the sort of policy approach, if you like, that we expect to be taking over the coming months as we consolidate this into a single operation.
Councillor Caput.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to come back to the recommendations specifically, and I think given many of the points and discussions that we've just had, I was sort of wondering whether we can tighten up recommendation A in terms of obviously approving the proposals and some quite major delegations, considering the quite, we're at an advanced stage, but we're still quite a long way off sort of signing the heads of terms. And it's making or seeking to obviously delegate to officers some quite significant decisions and powers. And then obviously there's just sort of the recommendation that it will be reported back to board, in terms of regular oversight reports and to this committee. I'm a little bit concerned about that, given the obviously basically the implications of some of the decisions that will be made, in terms of bus services, bus contracts, bus policy and funding, hopefully for the positive. But I just think that this committee and crucially board should have more of a say on that. So I wondered whether we can amend, if everybody agrees, recommendation A to either bring it back here at a more advanced stage, or obviously hammer in the sort of updates rather than doing it via the sort of delegation and key decisions, because I think that risks things being missed inadvertently.
Thank you. I agree that's important. I don't know if the monitoring officer has any advice on how we can keep committee informed.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the concerns is the period that we're entering into in respect of transport transition is crucial when we're starting to look at individual contracts where we may need to take some decisions outside of our natural award cycle to enable us to move forward and to ensure that those key decisions are able to be continued with. So it wasn't so much a position being set out to remove oversight or to remove the decision-making from the appropriate board or committee. It was really to be able to have the pragmatic business of getting on with the business as usual, which falls into the principles that are set out within the paragraph 2.4. So in respect of the reason and the purpose for having that, it is also envisaged that any decisions made by the delegated officer would be in consultation with the appropriate leaders, and the appropriate matters would be taken forward to the oversight, to the overview and scrutiny committee, so that there would be opportunity for feedback from the 4 constituent leaders and the mayor into any of these decisions where our constitution would otherwise require that. So that is baked in to the delegations that are being sought, but there is recognition in the paper that this is an ask, and of course committee is able to make any decisions that it wishes to. It's probably right that I hand over perhaps back to Peter in respect of specific reasons, but I hope that explains why we are looking to ask for these delegations and the safeguards and limits that delegated power is being set within.
Just very briefly, Chair. Thank you, Catherine. We're really talking about some nuts and bolts here around things like systems contracts or bus service contracts that are part of the overall principle of novating the contracts necessary for EMCCA to take on those functions. I guess the question is, how necessary is it for the committee to approve individual contract transfer and novation? Or is that something that really could be wrapped up as part of a delegation? Because essentially it's a discussion between the contract holder currently, which will be one authority or another, and EMCCA, and indeed the contract holder, the operator, in order to transfer a particular contract. So it's that sort of thing. It's very much nuts and bolts and sort of process, rather than principle, which this committee might be more interested in doing.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you. That's quite helpful. I guess in terms of specifically the bus services contracts that you just mentioned, I would be a little bit concerned about delegating that, because obviously there are some potentially quite major implications. We all know the increasing costs of bus contracts. Hopefully that's something that EMCCA is happy to take on board and to positively, expand and extend bus service contracts. But I just think, given obviously the high public profile, we've already touched on it in the questions, that again, it is just a little bit of a concern in terms of delegating that. Don't want to hold anything up, and I think business as usual absolutely should be delegated. And again, I think it's just, given what the monitoring officer said, I don't think that's perhaps clearly sort of set out in the recommendations, because I know at 2.4 it says regular oversight reports will be presented to board and the overview and scrutiny committee. That implies to me, and I may be reading it wrong, but it's the implication that I've got, that will come afterwards, after the decisions have been made, whereas I think, without putting words in the monitoring officer's mouth, that she's just indicated that no, actually the decisions where necessary will still come to board. So I think, given the conversation, I'm assured by the conversation we've just had, but I do think we probably need to tighten up those recommendations.
I don't know if you've got advice on how we can tighten that up, because that's quite right.
So just to firstly say, any contract extensions which are currently held by constituent authorities will be decisions that are taken by constituent authorities. So that's a really important distinction because they aren't currently owned by EMCCA and they won't be owned by EMCCA until the novations process, which is again a secondary step of this. So that may answer some of the initial concern. In terms of the decision making that would otherwise come to board, we're talking about the decision levels which are set out within the constitution of EMCCA. So the decisions where the value would mean that they are key decisions will still have a key decision tag and they will still be subject to call-in. So they won't be enacted until that call-in period has passed. So again, I don't know if that and the detail of the delegation sort, which is set out at 2.4, hopefully gives some comfort to that. But, Chair, if there is wording which it would be helpful to discuss, I would be happy to discuss that. But to be very clear that any decisions which would otherwise fall to board will still be subject to the process of overview and scrutiny is a really significant and important limit to the powers which are passing to the delegated officers.
Just very quick addition to that. Thank you, Catherine, again. And just to reassure around continuity of service, there is no intention at all of changing the services that will be novated as they are novated to EMCCA. It will be whatever is out there that's contracted at the moment by Derbyshire or Nottinghamshire or Derby City or Nottingham City. And as that contract is novated and then becomes an EMCCA contract, the expectation and the intention is that those services would continue for the duration of those contracts. Clearly, as and when we come to those contracts coming up for renewal, then there's a consideration that we will need to take based on policy and based on principles that we would then develop in the intervening period.
Yeah, Chair. I think that's helpful. I'm just trying to think of the best way forward to ensure nothing's sort of inadvertently missed. And I wonder whether we could delegate it to officers along with the constituent authority officers just to tighten up those recommendations in advance of board, because obviously we're referring it to board and that will then give you a week, I think a week or just under, to tighten those up in relation to that. Because I think that it is just the wording in the paper. I don't think there's a specific issue. I think we're all aligned on it. I think it's just the wording in the paper of that 2.4 that it's requesting quite a significant delegation, which has then been condensed into a single line of obviously recommendation A.
Thank you. Yeah, Catherine, if we can work with officers between now and the board meeting to tighten that up, that'd be helpful.
Yes, certainly. And also just to note that recommendation B does talk about the recommendation is in consultation with statutory officers and the Transport Technical Officer Group. So those are to be read in conjunction because it was absolutely recognised. This is a consensual process across all authorities.
Okay. Super. Thank you very much. Councillor Flitter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for an extremely good report. However, when we talk about under 2.4 local bus services, I am pleased to note that we're going to be looking at educational needs and service within that sector, and also adult care transport. That in itself, it may be a question for constituency authorities, but we don't seem to talk about community transport anymore, and that is vital for our elderly residents on the edge of towns or in villages, which that connection is vital to our local town centres. And also, when we talk about local bus services, please do not forget that on the edge of our towns, especially on our market towns in the Dales, we have got a lot of lower income areas that rely on a 6-day service. And too often we get that cut down to 5 days. And it is the lower income sector that rely, especially the elderly, they rely on that link to our town centres every single day, not just Monday to Friday. So we need to be taking that into consideration. And also, just on page 13, I was looking at the figures that are to be divided into the local areas, but I've got no balance on that. I mean, I know where the figures came from, but how do they reflect on what we have on today's standard? Is this an increase? Is it a decrease? If so, how are we going to make the service better?
Thank you very much. Peter?
Thank you. If I could just, if you just answer that point in relation to the funding first, if that's okay. So the figures shown within this report are effectively the amounts that are required to keep the current service running for next year. So it's neither an increase nor a decrease for the ones shown in this report. But if you then read this in conjunction with the next report, sorry, the next but one report I think it is, which is around the transport investment, there will be further BSIP funding that is available to potentially make improvements into the future. This is about the landing of existing services, lifting and shifting almost into EMCCA's responsibility to take those forward, and there is further funding available to then improve those through additional BSIP funding into the future. So hopefully that's helpful in relation to this report as opposed to the investment report, which looks at how we improve things.
And just very quickly on the point about community transport and demand responsive transport and supported bus services and commercial bus services are all part of the overall provision of transport services across the region. And I think the opportunity of bringing that together, that full understanding of what's there and what might be, what mechanism, if you like, might best provide for a particular community or particular service is something that we would be able to do on a consistent basis across the wider authority as we move forward into taking on those direct responsibilities in the future.
Thank you very much. Anthony?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points, if I may. Just partly echoing on Councillor Mellon's point, I think there's a bit for me that's sort of missing in a sense in terms of how we're ensuring that democratic engagement piece around those services that are done by our neighbours, in particular, sort of whether either looking at franchising or they've already entered franchising, sort of Sheffield, Greater Manchester, and the other side, sort of Leicestershire, how we're ensuring there's some level of engagement, and particularly in terms of decisions that have been made sort of on our behalf, but we're not necessarily directly involved, how to make sure there's involvement or input into those. I think there's a piece for me around, in terms of sort of the infrastructure section, we mentioned that we're taking over bus stops, etc. But I think, that's going to be a very long piece of work given the sort of the fragmented setup. I know just particularly across parts of Derbyshire where there are a mix of some are by the county, some are by boroughs, some are by parishes, and some separate to that as well. And I think, I don't want us to sort of get bogged down in the detail of making sure we've got everything transferred in the right place on some of the elements like that, when to me the greater goals are around sort of some of the bus service improvement work plans that I think need to take that greater priority. Thanks.
Absolutely agree, Peter. I don't know if you...
Yeah, just very quickly on that. I think cross-boundary is a very good point, and we are already aware of decisions that are made by Greater Manchester, for example, on services that come into Derbyshire, and the impact that they have, and to some extent the imposition of those services and the specifications of those services on communities within our area. And we're therefore already engaged, we're plugged into the conversations with GM, both at Derbyshire and at EMCCA to some extent, and we'll be able to exert perhaps more influence in the future on those sorts of decisions, similarly as South Yorkshire develop their franchising model and with specific services on cross-boundary. I've forgotten the other point you made, apologies. Oh, infrastructure. I think it's a big issue. There's a lot of infrastructure out there. It will take a time for us to get complete grip of it, if you like, and I recognise there's different ownerships and different levels of responsibility already. But that is for the consolidated team to go at and to gradually over time to make that a more consistent provision across the region.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Ralph.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 points I'd like to just raise and question. One, the point around novation of contracts and the fact that contracts sit with constituent authorities until that point of novation. I don't think any constituent authority is going to take advantage of that situation, but equally I would hope at the very least this committee would be a consultee on any contract changes or extensions that a constituent authority may be looking to make on a contract which would be being novated. And is that in place? And if it isn't in place, could that be negotiated and talked through? Looking through the roadmap, the systems, I notice you pointed about October being a risky date potentially, and certainly looking at a 4-month implementation for consolidation of systems seems extremely ambitious to me, having been involved in numerous transitional contract and systems migration positions as this. But you note then that it's interim systems that are launching in October. Could you give some sense as to what will actually happen is it sort of sticking plasters and goodwill in October, and there is then over the next year, 2 years, that everything will then be consolidated? And finally, you've just talked about it, but I was going to pick up on the condition survey because I was a little concerned seeing that in terms of, I would hope that, particularly with the assets coming from constituent authorities, that you could just inherit pre-existing condition surveys. And just wanting to understand what is the risk appetite, the risk planning around that in terms of if we find that the condition surveys reveal huge amounts of investment required, how is that going to be managed and dealt with? Because it does feel as if the fact that that's there, we're going into that whole situation a little blind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I pick up the first point of those first for Councillor Ralph, which is in relation to the contracts innovation, just to make you aware that we've got and have had for some time now, a very strong procurement working group that is looking at each of the contracts, and that includes representatives from EMCCA, plus also representatives from each of the transport authorities as well. And that's a clear remit to understand when extensions may be required, and actually give visibility around that as well, so that there is clear visibility, both for budgeting purposes and for continuity purposes, where those extensions take place. So from an officer perspective, we absolutely have that certainty in place, and have had that working group up and running now for the last couple of months or so. So and it appears to be working very, very well.
And just on the 2 other items Councillor Ralph raised, with the systems transfer and the systems migration, I wouldn't be able to give you the detail of what systems are being looked at. All I know is that there is a whole area of work around systems that relate to the existing activities of the authorities, whether it's data systems or procurement systems or whatever. I did say, as part of my presentation at the beginning, that there is a significant amount of risk still associated with an October target, but nevertheless we are still focused on October. Probably systems is on the critical path in relation to achieving that date. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of identifying which systems are appropriate to transfer. Do we need a new system, a bespoke system just for EMCCA, or a combination? And obviously there's a number of different systems relating to different activities. So yes, there's still a fair amount of risk around that, the people, the colleagues who are involved from across the authorities and within EMCCA are aware of the risks, identifying those risks and looking to mitigate those. I think at some point in the next couple of months we will have more of an idea of the lead-in, the specific pathway into a transfer of systems and transition or creation of systems that are fit for purpose. We'll then be able to be more definitive about whether October is achievable or not, I'm afraid. The other point about condition survey, yeah, absolutely. What are we taking on? We don't know what we don't know. There's some information on condition of assets and infrastructure within the authorities. It's not complete. And I guess, I guess it is what it is, in as much as it would still be a risk for, say, Derbyshire if they're looking after assets at the moment that are in danger of failing in some shape or form. But I guess the opportunity again about provision and the additional funding that we'll get from government to enable us to put some of this right over a period of time is the real opportunity that we're looking to improve and uplift the overall provision of services and infrastructure that's associated with it. So I think that's the point at the moment. Again, it's a risk element. It's probably not a critical path risk element in the context of getting to October. But it's something that we need to be mindful of and make provision for in due course.
Yeah, in terms of that provision, I'm just wondering if extensive additional budgeting is required, is that then going and asking government for that, or are we budgeting to put aside reserves for that risk within EMCCA?
Do you want to answer?
I'm very happy to answer that. It's, in terms of any changes that might be required, we are keeping both a major reserve and a transport-focused reserve. And in fact, we're committing, I think, a further £1 million every year into transport-related reserves, if my memory is correct, from next year onwards as part of the medium-term financial plan. And that money will be used to cover any unforeseen issues that may occur as part of the transition moving forward as well. So that so we will have some buffer there. And also, of course, none of us know exactly yet what the outcome of the spending review will be that the government are undertaking in the summer. But we'll be making our case very strongly to them, again, to focus around a public sector within the region. Thank you.
And finally, Ndukwi.
Thank you, Chair. And so seeing, and I see what happened there. Normally, when people get my name wrong, they owe me a pint, so I'll...
I was just clarifying that I got that right. The most embarrassing moment of the meeting nearly just happened.
It's Ndukwe, yeah. Thank you. So seeing as we're getting lots of information, that we're having to sort of like digest in quick succession, sort of like a short time, may I suggest, and also because we're here not just for the benefit of our separate authorities, but for the whole East Midlands region, that we have something of a tailored workshop session where our the committee members, can bring their regional understandings and also help working together to support Mayor Clare and support the visions of EMCCA, but I think if we have those workshops where we can all just come together and share our experiences and learn from each other, that would also help in advancing this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion, particularly for the next item as well, in the development of the local transport plan. I don't know, Peter, if you have a view, but yes, we should.
Yes, I mean, I would be very happy to enable and facilitate a workshop session informally with the members on a number of different issues that fall under this committee's remit. And obviously we can provide more detail and have more dialogue in those sort of forums. So I'm very happy to do that and facilitate that in due course.
Super. Good way to end that item. Thank you. The recommendations, are everyone happy with those as long as they're tightened up for member involvement as they go to board? Everyone happy with that? Super. Thank you. We'll move on to the development of the local transport plan then. Is this you again, Peter?
It's not actually. I've asked my colleague Nicola Weekly to come and present this. Again, we've got a few slides, Chair, to talk you through before discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I've got a few slides to summarise the work that we've done on the local transport plan. It gives us an opportunity to update the committee on the work we've done collaboratively with the four constituent authorities. We've done a significant amount of work with them to get to this stage. So it's really giving us the opportunity to create a regional transport plan that sets out our ambition for the region. It looks at the cross-boundary links and some of the better connectivity communities for the economic opportunities in the area, encouraging investment across our diverse urban and rural landscapes. It's going to be a new local transport plan for the next 15 to 20 years, setting out key responsibilities and the functions of EMCCA as a local transport authority. It'll take the form of a single local transport plan, so that's something to be mindful of, and replace the 4 constituent authority transport plans. As I said, it's been a very collaborative approach, working with the 4 constituent authorities. So far, we've been working for a number of months with the 4 constituent authorities, and we've done a significant amount of work on that. There's quite a few. It'll help in EMCCA's ability to influence transport and spatial strategy, both at a local level and at regional and national levels, so that's something really mindful of. It'll help prioritise strategic investment through our future national, future road and rail investment programmes that will help influence nationally what we do. And it'll help address cross-boundary issues. And one of the fundamental things is supporting the wider aims of EMCCA and the inclusive growth strategy. So we've done a significant piece of work looking at the evidence base. This is the information that's currently out there at the moment, what we've got out there in terms of how that will inform the local transport plan. So it is attached as an appendices, but I'm well aware that's a significant piece of work. And again, we've just talked about possibly having an informal workshop to go through some of these issues, which I'm very mindful that it will be helpful to get feedback from the committee members about it. So there's 4 challenges that have been pulled out of the evidence base so far. One's around population growth and the impact that has on travel demand. So as you can see on that graph there, there's projections for significant population growth in the EMCCA region. The next one, the environmental impacts of transport, both around carbon and air quality and other issues like that. And again, something to be mindful of is we still haven't got central government guidance about the development of the local transport plan. So one of the things they did talk about previously was quantified carbon reduction in there. So again, we're still waiting for further information from central government. I think it's expected maybe the end of this year, possibly, to have that guidance. So we've done a bit of work around the evidence that is currently out there around carbon, and we've worked with the subnational transport body. They've got a carbon tool which helps inform some of this work. But again, that is still under development, so we're working closely with them on that. The third issue, a key challenge, is the transport user, addressing their issues and what they actually want the network to do. One of the pieces of evidence there is about transport-related social exclusion. It's a piece of work that another subnational transport body has done, but it covers our area as well. And it just shows some of these issues that we're trying to address. And then the fourth issue is our transport network, making it more resilient, and how we balance the needs of all users across that transport network. This slide demonstrates the emerging strategic goals that are coming out of the work we've done so far with the constituent authorities. It also goes back to how it addresses the national policies, some of the main government missions that are coming out of central government, and some of the Secretary of State priorities that are coming out there. And then it goes down to the inclusive growth objectives that EMCCA are developing. And what we've done with over the last few months is we've got an emerging vision coming out of here. There's an emerging vision statement that talks about an integrated, sustainable transport network that supports our inclusive growth objectives, delivering improved travel choices, better connected communities and greater economic opportunities, including cross-boundary links, which will encourage investment across our diverse urban and rural landscapes. So that's a suggested statement we could use as part of the vision work. And then following on from that, we've got some emerging strategic goals, and they're across 4 themes, and they're split into 7 goals. So that really sets the scene about the work we've done so far with the constituent authorities in terms of setting a vision statement, some strategic goals and 4 themes. Underneath each of the strategic goals, we have got policies, and I think they're attached to the appendices. This slide really encaptures some of the work we've done in terms of the emerging principles for investment. So again, they go back to the key challenges and some of the work that we've also done in terms of the investment programme and working with the constituent authorities to discuss their priorities for investment. So we've got a more resilient transport network. There's issues around inclusive growth, supporting the economy, which is a key aim of EMCCA. Continuing to support modal choice, that's around active travel and sustainable transport. So again, we're working closely with partners such as Active Travel England and the work we've just had about public transport operations moving across to EMCCA. There's the decarbonisation of the transport network, again to go back to central government ambitions and fulfil their aims on the network. There's working with partners to facilitate the take-up of low-emission vehicles, and also in both in terms of electric vehicle infrastructure on the ground and working with partners around fleets. And then obviously scheduled bus services and demand-responsive transport. Cross-boundary connectivity, we've already discussed this morning around the importance of that, and future transport solutions, which is building on the current wealth of skills and expertise across this area in the future transport solutions. This slide shows an indicative timeline around the LTP development and consultation process. So we're suggesting recommendation to committee, particularly emerging principles around a consultation process, a two-stage consultation process. And we'll bring, well, subject to what happens committee today, bring it up the next committee, some more key fundamentals on that public consultation material. And looking to update, hopefully go out to consultation in summer 2025 and then update the LTP as a result of that in autumn 2025 with possible first draft of an LTP in spring 2026. And this just summarises the recommendations we've had made to committee with this report. So there's noting the progress on developing the LTP that we've done collaboratively with constituent authorities, asking for the approval around an integrated sustainability appraisal, which is something we have a statutory assessment we have to undertake as part of developing the policies. So we're asking for approval on that and to get a procurement exercise to get consultants in to help with that work. We're asking for approval around a two-stage approach on the public consultation. So the first stage would be this consultation on the emerging principles of the local transport plan, and the second consultation would be around a draft final plan. And particularly the final point, which is seeking committee's views on the work done so far, particularly the emerging principles and the recommended process we've suggested around the consultation process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions? Councillor Ralph first.
Yeah, I don't mean to be brutal, but I don't think there's anything new there. You know, we could very much, the points that have been raised are things that I think we could have written 3-4 years ago, no problem whatsoever. And I'm not seeing much of an actual plan in terms of what we're going to actually do. And I worry that this is, you know, what people get frustrated with in the public is we are talking and re-talking about the same things over and over again and not actually getting on with improving the situation. We know what the challenges are, we know what we want to do about it, but there's very light on how we're actually going to do it. And so I would like to understand what is the timeline for getting to the how and then actually getting on with the how. Because if 2026 is the target for just signing off the where we're at situation, that feels a lot of wasted time to me.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to elaborate on the timeline and the slide you had up.
I think the issue we've got is we have to follow due process in terms of we have to gather the evidence in order to support the principles. I would welcome a particular discussion from committee about the process, the timeline, but there is a significant amount of work we've done in terms of the evidence base to support how we develop the principles. I would agree in the fact that they are very similar policies, very similar strategic goals, but we obviously have to do this in an iterative process in terms of the wider aims of EMCCA, and I think that's something else that we have to be very mindful of in terms of some of the work in the Inclusive Growth Commission work and the spatial plan. and how we can do that in an iterative process. But I'd welcome people's views around the timeline.
Councillor Ainsworth.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things. As a local politician, I would like to see the consultation go further down the line to more local people, as this is here. So, I mean, with our town councils and parish councils now, I'm aware that might open a bag of worms and I want it to go down my street, but the local knowledge is there. And if it might be just a tweak we need to do to actually include somebody else where from here, we might not know that information. So I would suggest come and look at that. I completely applaud the increase of modal choice, but can we not forget that when we get to the end of that modal choice, that we now require improving modal choice transfer at the end of that, because sometimes you need to look at not just what you've got the choice of, but at the end of that first choice, how do you get the rest of the way?
Thank you. When we consult on the final draft, we'll involve parish councils, will we? Town councils, etc.
What I was suggesting in terms of the consultation in summer 2025, I can see that as being a public consultation, if that's what committee agreed to. So it would include going out to everybody.
Perfect. Thank you. Councillor Corbett.
Thanks, Chair. A question first and then some feedback. Just in terms of the evidence base, I know obviously we've touched on the fact that the population across the EMCCA authority is going to increase quite significantly. Obviously the evidence base was done sort of last year, and I know it comes with a health warning in terms of the slides. I think just looking at the population side for an example, it seems quite low in relation to, because I think it says 100,000 growth across EMCCA over the next sort of, I think it was 10 years. By my reckoning, even in Derbyshire alone, with the new housing targets, that's Derbyshire alone. So I'm just conscious that the evidence needs to be right, because this document is going to last for a significant amount of time. So is there a plan to sort of update the evidence based on new government policy as we run into the consultation? That's my question first. Do you want me to come back with my comment, or?
Do you want to answer the question first?
I'm very well aware that the evidence base is just a snapshot in time, and it will be something that we continually update.
Thanks, that's useful. And then just in terms of the specific sort of consultation and how we do that, I sort of echo some of Councillor Ralph's comments that it's how to engage people. So completely agree with consulting, but it's how to engage sort of residents, because like Councillor Ainsworth says, you don't want to go down to the minutiae of street by street, but actually you need that to inform the wider EMCCA priorities. And actually the issues on one street are probably quite similar across the board. So just looking at the draft questionnaire, and I appreciate it's a high level draft, I think my comments would be we need to very much condense it, but then we need to build out the priorities, because it's you sort of, as you're going through it, you sort of, if I'm a member of the public filling this in, you sort of have lost interest sort of halfway through, if I'm brutally honest. Whereas I think actually the later questions about getting residents to prioritise and rank things are the critical ones. Because actually, when you look at the overarching themes, I think we'd all agree with them. But the challenge we have, and it's the challenge we all face in local government and national government as well, to be fair, is sadly we've not got the resources to do everything we want to do. And so it's about what is your priority amongst those issues, amongst buses, roads, etc. And I think that comes through later on in the sort of questionnaire, but I'd actually just bump that to the front, because that's what we really want to know, is what's the priority, because I'm afraid we have to make difficult choices about where we focus resources. Hopefully at some point in the future we might not have to, but I don't see us ever getting to that point. So yeah, that would be my feedback on the questionnaire, is to condense it, but then get that priority basis out. Because I think that most residents, and I certainly would, I'd want to tick yes to every one of those, earlier on. So it's having that difficult think about, actually, if I've got to think and I've only got a certain part, which one do I prioritise, would be my feedback.
I think that's a great point, and then that can shape the investment that EMCCA put forward. Can we move that to the first question? Thank you. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you. Those population growth figures are quite frightening in some ways. Obviously, houses are needed. But if we do not encourage more of those people to leave their cars at home and get on a bus or another mode of transport, then our roads are going to be considerably more choked up with cars, and our aim to reduce our carbon footprint is going to be failing. So I do believe that in some situations, new housing can make a struggling bus commercial and to work. You certainly have that on the edge of the ward I represent, we represent, in terms of Gedling next door, new housing, actually making a bus route much more sustainable, and I think we need to look at that very carefully. I think the other thing that's not in here is about duplicating good practice. I think we mentioned that in the previous report, but I think we have good practice across our region, and that surely we need to we're not reinventing the wheel here, we're trying to enhance that which is good and improve that which is less good, and I think that needs a mention.
Thank you. Do you want to come back?
I think I would just emphasise that we'd appreciate all comments back in terms of how we develop the consultation process and making sure we capture some of these key issues that you're talking about. So I know we talked about possibly having some sort of informal workshop, but I wonder whether that was something that, particularly for the LTP, would be helpful in terms of ensuring the consultation is what you actually want and require.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. It relates partially to, and a few people have already mentioned related things, but Councillor Mellon's comment about good practice, and it's worth mentioning again. It was mentioned in a previous item about ensuring we use expertise from the constituent local authorities at present. No need to reinvent the wheel if there's something working successfully already. So I hope that there will be close liaison with the current local authorities to ensure that that best practice and successes are related and continued wherever possible. I suppose just a question about and the local transport plan, the government guidance was referred to in your presentation. I just wondered if you can clarify what impact that will have, given the fact that the Mayor has a transport strategy. How will that guidance impact on the Mayor's strategy?
We've seen a number of different versions of the central government guidance, but that was before the current government was in place. But we've got some clear ideas about what it might involve. There's obviously the work on the integrated national strategy that they've talked about, and something similar to perhaps the London-based local transport plan. We're also working closely with DFT regarding that they're developing some tools that would help the development of the local transport plan, such as connectivity tool. And we're working with a subnational transport body on the carbon tool that they've been asked to undertake to help the development of local transport plans by DFT. So we are working closely with them to understand what those implications might be in terms of the local transport plan. And we have regular conversations with them about the development of our local transport plan.
A little bit tongue-in-cheek, Chairman. I noticed that this report was, part of it must have been written some time ago, because on page 51 it refers to 6 zones of on-demand buses in Nottinghamshire. We've had 7 since the middle of last year, so perhaps that could be updated.
And there'll be more to come, I'm sure. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand meetings come around really quickly, but we seem to cover a lot of theory, not the actual kind of progress. So again, it's back to that first question I asked on the previous one. Can we, when we do the updates, it'll be really good to understand what's changed since the last meeting, so we're not covering the same grounds. I also think there is a clear tension within the plans in terms of achieving the right balance between urban and rural issues. I don't think we have achieved that at the moment, so I think that's a thing that we need to probably focus on. So Nottingham has the best transport network outside of London. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So I need to kind of understand what expertise, or, you know, how are we using them kind of expertise that we've got in the region, because clearly, you know, Nottingham have got that worked out quite well. A comprehensive evidence base has been compiled and could be used more to develop more localised policies. So it's really good that we've got the data. The next question is, well, we've got the data, what are we going to do with it? So what specific issues are we trying to address? And, you know, that we have so much good examples, like our integrated transport. So we're not starting from a base where we've got no foundation. And I think this kind of report needs to focus more on, well, what are we really good at in the region? And then how do we then go to the next stage of making sure it's, because we've got parts in the region that are really good, not all of it. So how do we make sure it's interconnected and then build upwards? Thank you.
Thank you. Good points. Nicola.
I'd agree with everything said. We do work closely with constituent authorities. We've obviously got some people actually seconded into our team from the constituent authorities, and we meet regularly with officers. So, yes, we want to build on what good practice is out there and take it forward in a new ambitious LTP.
Councillor Swan.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to refer to the consultation document. I know it's draft, and I think this is an opportunity to feed into that. You know, putting people at the heart of everything that we do is, in theory, what this should be about. And I'm sure all of us here in this room have experience of consultation, and so do our communities have experience of consultation. I think this is there is a real opportunity here to shrink this down, because the reality is, based on all our experiences, the likelihood, I think somebody said it earlier, boredom will creep in very early and we will lose that opportunity. So, you know, I would like the kind of committee to kind of look at that. I know we're trying to capture everything, but I think this shouldn't be a capture one or consultation. I think if we focus on people and place, then the reality is we might be able to reduce that down in a way that people think that they can contribute, and there will be an outcome as a direct result of that, other than consultation for consultation's sake. Thank you.
No, I agree, and it builds on what Councillor Cooper said about getting the priorities questions out there early, because people will stop filling them in. So can we just look at that? And if any members got any suggestions on the survey, just send them in, and we'll rebuild that around the final proposals going forward. Councillor Ralph, and then I'll bring Flit.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Councillor Mellon's point around the expansion of population and planning, because, for instance, in Ashfield, in my ward, we've just lost at National Appeal a planning application that was outside of the national government's guidance as distance from public transport. And that's incredibly frustrating, because we are wanting to make sure that new homes have access to good public transport. And certainly I would hope that through this work and through this body, we could be pushing harder on national government, but also if there's any regional policies we could put in place around planning as well, to further strengthen that requirement that new development has to be connected to this transport network that we're going to be building out, because it is the only way that we will succeed as a region.
I'll bring the Mayor in for that one.
I think really just to say a very broad comment, which is one of the opportunities that we will have as a combined authority is to develop a spatial plan. And within that spatial plan to be thinking about how in new developments the transport infrastructure supports and serves those, but actually also achieves our aim and goal for a sustainable region in all aspects of that.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and then Councillor Flit.
Thanks, Chair. I think for me, there's just a trick that we need to look at in terms of when we're doing the consultation at a more local level. There is that, you know, divergence of sort of existing service across the borough, from, you know, to the extent that there is in Nottingham with the tram, buses, etc., as opposed to, you know, the differences in some of the other areas. And I think as well, again, there's that need for that link through from what some of our neighbours are doing, because to a certain extent, in some places, that will have a greater impact than what ours is. And I think probably being clear on those schemes that we're looking, that we're starting to include in the draft in terms of that we're looking to put forward, as to a little bit on deliverability of them. Are they sort of completely deliverable by us as EMCCA, or do they need the support of those of our neighbours to be able to put them through? Or are there some cases when actually, our role will be supporting some of that scheme being put together, but it will actually be delivered by someone else? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Nicola, I don't know if you want to come in or agree.
I totally agree with those points. So, yes, it's something we take on board. Thank you.
Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, it's just a comment, Chair. It always amazes me when we see a consultation plan from local government, and you always go out for comments and consultation in the worst month of the year, or the worst months of the year, summertime. People are not here. They're away, they're doing other things. You don't get the full response. So, I'd like to see that moved to summer, autumn, so that we can get all the responses we need. Because a good response is whether it be good or bad, we need a good response. And I don't think that time of year you will particularly get that response. And I also agree with the comments that we really have to look at what we want to get out of this consultation and frame those questions and put the right questions to who we're getting a response from.
Can we push the consultation back past the summer?
It's certainly something we can have a look at and review the timeline, following all the comments back from today.
Chair, I just want to offer just a little bit of a counter to Councillor Flitter's. I think particularly in some areas where we're looking at that consultation, if, for example, you're wanting to consult around some of the issues around why so many people are driving in the Peak District rather than looking at sort of public transport options, then a lovely summer's day may well be the best day to sort of try and capture people when they're, in some cases, heading out to the hills and dumping the cars all over the place. I know we were, on a local authority basis, we were in discussions with the Peak Park yesterday, and I think one of their particular concerns is sort of sometimes some of the consultations, whilst we're particularly aiming at sort of getting the views of residents from within EMCCA, I think those that are travelling into the area, if we're looking at sort of our other strategy aims of sort of inclusive growth, and particularly around some of that tourism, getting more people to visit us, I think, we've got to time the consultation to make sure we're getting that good response from residents, but also for particular issues, we're getting that good response from visitors as well.
And we need to be careful not to slow down the delivery of the actual plan and prevent us getting on with stuff. Can I just make a comment on active travel, if I may, and ask if we can stress the difference between active travel in rural areas and in urban areas. So in urban areas, it may include cycle lanes, but in rural areas, it's unlocking rural footpaths and former mineral lines, etc., for cycling and footpaths away from the highway. I just worry that if you live in a county and you read active travel on the survey, you're going to think that EMCCA are going to put a cycle lane down a rural road that's full of potholes instead of filling the potholes, or unlocking rural footpaths and cycle stuff off into rural land. Can we just stress that in the document, please, just to keep people engaged? That would be helpful. All right, recommendations, as you've heard them, are we all happy with those? And we'll set up a working group as well before the final draft goes to consultation. Yeah, super, thank you. The next item is establishing a regional-wide digital connectivity and inclusive strategy. Ian, I think, is going to talk about that. You're welcome to sit at the back. Yeah, that's fine.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ian Stoddard. I'm the Digital Connectivity Manager for Nottinghamshire County Council and Derbyshire County Council. I'm bringing this paper to the committee for your consideration. The basis of this, this paper is that we are, within the counties, we already have digital connectivity frameworks and strategies in place, but we need to recognise that EMCCA provides us with a unique opportunity to expand and deliver better outcomes. You'll note from the paper that you can easily identify that there is a big divide between urban and rural in terms of full fibre gigabit capability, and that does have some significant downsides and barriers to investment and growth across the area. I'm minded to refer back to the earlier question regarding Hope Valley. One of the key things there that we're looking at, because of digital connectivity, covers and underpins and enables so much of what we do in modern society. If you take that, we can't move the hills around Hope Valley, but we can look at how we can improve the connectivity to enable transport-related devices. In fact, at this moment in time in Derbyshire, we are mapping the mobile signal across the whole of the county, excluding the city, and High Peak is the next area, so that we can come back with definitive views on what is and isn't good and where that causes issues for residents, businesses, and public services. So that is why we're looking at recommending this as an approach to cover off various different areas: the urban-rural divide, mobile connectivity gaps, where we can best utilise EMCCA to provide efficiencies and scale in that infrastructure aspect, where we can group together, whether it's for public services, for voluntary, for residents, and such like. One of the key things that we also noted from a cross-cutting theme is that the affordability, skills gaps, access devices, the actual investment environment in terms of planning, enabling the rollout of mobile and full fibre can also be an element of restriction. So that is the essence, and I'm not going to go and belabor this anymore because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, but that is what we're recommending and looking to do in terms of coming back with concrete proposals on the strategy and the work plan to deliver that.
Thank you, Ian, for that introduction. Any comments or questions for Ian? Yep, Councillor Crumpet.
Really welcome this and really welcome the work so far on it. I guess the one thing I'd just sort of ask that we do focus on, and Ian touched on it, is the sort of mobile coverage aspect, because I think that's often something that's not, it sort of falls behind, because you initially when you consider digital, you look immediately at fibre, internet connection. But actually, specifically in Derbyshire, it does feel, I don't know about the rest of EMCCA, that we do still have quite a significant issue with phone signal, phone black spots, and I know that's touched on in the report. And again, it's not always obvious, because I think service providers say, we've got 99% coverage. I guarantee to you when you're up High Peak, but even also in North East Derbyshire, that is not the case. Would really ask that we do put that as a key sort of focus as part of this work.
Thank you. I'll bring Ian back in.
Absolutely, and it is far wider, because the impact to things like EV charging, if you don't have an internet connection, you don't get any public EV charging. I can cite my own experiences with my elderly parents who live in the outskirts of Derby. Access to things like remote wards saves them a huge amount of time, empowers them. They wouldn't have it if they hadn't had decent digital connectivity, and that's one of the aspects we have to look at beyond just wires on poles or whether you get a mobile signal. The other thing I would point out to you that is referenced in the report is that Ofcom only, at this moment in time, judge good mobile connectivity based on there being one supplier in that area. That is because they're looking at it through the lens of emergency services, which is absolutely necessary. We will be looking at it in the lens of how much ubiquity we can get in coverage, because somebody having cover on, let's say, 3 isn't necessarily going to help them if there is no 3 network in that area. And that's something that we're looking to use the data that we're collecting as a way of illustrating. There is already a study that's been undertaken in Nottinghamshire, and you can see that is publicly available. This is then to enable us, and just to go back on one aspect, which is the urban side, as part of that study, we found that one town centre, which is Kimberley, had no mobile coverage in its town centre. Through lobbying, we were able to get 2 networks to improve their connectivity, and we will still be talking to others and looking at alternative options of how we can bridge around that. And therefore, that's important for local events in that area. If you look at transport connectivity, health, adult and social care, education, it has such an important impact, whether it's mobile or full fibre. And I'd also include Wi-Fi. We certainly are looking at how we can use public assets to benefit that and improve that connectivity and make access as universal as possible. I would also add that the bit that we're also dealing with is the deep supply side and making sure that from a capacity perspective, the counties, the cities are not impacted by areas that are attracting investments such as Manchester and London. So we get our fair shout as well.
Good, very reassuring. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks, Chair. To present is I'd just echo sort of Councillor Culpit's point around particularly that mobile access, particularly the journey from to get here today, you cross various parts of both Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, and the mobile coverage is patchy, and I think particularly with the old-fashioned PSTN network being switched off, and then there's going to be a reliance on some more essentially mobile networks, particularly in some of our more rural aspects. I think it's how can we make sure that we get that coverage there, and I think that mapping exercise, particularly the mapping exercise covering the different operators, because in some cases some of the operators have expanded their coverage better than others have. So I think having that information available to be able to make those arguments in terms of getting that better coverage. And just the last one, although it's not strictly digital, I think just the comment that you made around electric charging, etc. I think there's probably a little bit of work around this that in terms of there are still some of those rural places where we can't look at going for charging or other similar infrastructure because there isn't the capacity in the network to be able to do that. And I suspect, although not strictly the remit of this, I think that, there's some work to do in parallel to it. Thanks.
Ian, I don't know if you want to come back on that.
Absolutely. There's not much I can disagree with that. The only thing I would say is that from the mobile will be an important backup, but the fact from our point of view where the really rural is impacted is that there will be a change. The copper may still be there. It just won't be that you'll have voice and data on 2 separate bits of copper. They'll all be on one. And our key driver there has to be to try and bridge that gap and overcome, whether it's full fibre, whether it's improved connectivity over mobile, and it's to make sure that the data side of things, which is becoming so important, is addressed.
Super, thank you. Councillor Mellon.
Yes, good paper, thank you. The only point I wanted to make is that digital inclusion is not all about connectivity, and that actually, although we do need to make sure that there is good coverage of broadband across the whole of the EMCCA region, it's also about having community venues available for people who haven't got Wi-Fi at home or haven't even got a computer to be able to access the things that they need to do in their lives, which require them to be online. So I think we need to balance that as well.
Agreed, and that's definitely part of our plans, and if I haven't articulated that sufficiently, I apologise.
Thank you. Councillor Ralph.
Yeah, the rural connectivity issue, I think, also affects the mobile phone backhaul as well, because I've been out in Bakewell before on a busy day. I've got perfect 5G signal, but still can't get data to buy a parking ticket at the car park because the backhaul is so saturated. And so I'm certain it's great to hear that you're getting some success in terms of lobbying, but I think we need to be making sure that it's not only saying yes we've got 5G here or yes we've got 4G here. If that mast hasn't got decent connectivity itself to backhaul. We're keen caravanners, and I was very, we're frequently frustrated being out in rural Derbyshire or rural places elsewhere in the UK with zero connectivity. I find it very frustrating that we're starting to switch off networks that could provide at least basic data access before we are in a position where we've got 100% coverage of the next generation. So I would love for us to be lobbying harder on that front because it's so frustrating when you cannot get a connection. And we went to the point of actually installing Starlink, which we are now having significant second thoughts about, given putting further money in Elon Musk's pocket is not appealing to me at the minute. But in terms of that rural information bus stop piece, I don't know whether the teams looking at that are aware of the very good low bit rate satellite solutions that are out there that therefore negate the need of having even a mobile phone signal, and hills don't really matter to it. So they're out there and probably worth those teams looking at as a potential solution for real-time information there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, over to you.
Yeah, it goes back to our point that you can fix coverage, but you also, one of the 3 points I always raise is there's coverage, there's capacity, and there's affordability. Capacity, we've seen it. I've been there outside Chatsworth House thinking I could get in, and I had 4 phones with me and couldn't get onto one. That is a supply issue at the mast. It is down to the mast. It's what we were able to then do to illustrate this and see whether we can find means and ways to overcome, because the issue is very much that when you get a situation like that, the local community suffer, whilst you don't want to diminish the attractiveness of a significant visitor attraction, but that is part and parcel of the whole piece that we'd be looking at is how we ensure that coverage is at those of a sufficient coverage and capacity and affordability. And that's 2 sides. One from the user distribution side, but also from the supply side for the telecommunications companies to invest. We can't always square that, but we will. Those are the part of the aspects we're looking at. So going back to the transport, we're not going to look at one size fits all. As you use the example, we will look at other options and means and how we can leverage that to bridge those gaps. So that's a key part of the strategy.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Swan.
Yeah, thank you, Ian, for that. One of the things that I'm quite interested in, and I can't actually see it in this report, so please say it is in there, you've missed it, is when we're talking about connectivity, whether there is space in that to talk about bus priority systems, which is slightly different but the same. I can't see it in the paper, but it would be nice for us to consider that to be developed as part of EMCCA's offer in some locations where I can think in Derby City, where it would be nice to have bus priority systems where we haven't got bus lanes, for example. So yeah, if it's not in there, is there an opportunity for us to put it in there?
Thank you. Is that you, Ian, or Peter?
I will address that from the connectivity side. Again, from bus priority, if I go back, what we're essentially trying to develop is a smart region rather than smart cities or smart islands. And in order to do that, you have to have the connectivity across the whole transport route. And by identifying, mapping, and then looking at what is and isn't there, we can contribute by filling in those gaps. So that's from the connectivity side.
Super. Thank you. So you've got the recommendations. Everyone happy to endorse those? Super. Thank you. Final item is the Transport Investment Programme, which means we're going to be spending money and getting stuff done, which is good. Alex, to introduce you, welcome to do it from there or up here.
Okay, thank you for giving time to do this. The purpose of this report is to bring together oversight of a number of different funding streams that are currently the responsibility of EMCCA on behalf of the region. There's been a variety of different announcements over recent months, and so the purpose is to put those together into a single position so it's easy to see what they are, but also to address some of the approval processes that we need to go through. Some of those streams are existing funding streams that would have continued. So, for example, the Integrated Transport Block, which is an annual allocation from DFT to local authorities, that would have continued irrespective of whether or not EMCCA had been created. There are also some funding streams in there that are unique to combined authorities. EMCCA will be the accountable body for all of them, but the delivery of them isn't going to fundamentally change. It would still be primarily delivered through the 4 constituent authorities with additional delivery on top of that provided by EMCCA. What the paper is asking for today is for committee to make recommendations to board. Because of the scale of funding involved, particularly in the 2 programmes that we're asking for the specific approval of, totalling £87 million, that needs to be considered and approved at board level. So we are asking committee to provide the approval or the recommendation to board that they subsequently approve. The 2 programmes we're referring to are the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, which is a combination of revenue and capital at 66 million, and the capital element of the Bus Services Improvement Plan at 21 million, referencing the fact that the revenue element of the BSIP has already been covered through Peter's transition paper earlier on. To support those, Appendix A provides itemised detail of the proposals for those programmes, and I will keep referring to them as proposals as I go through the presentation, not because there's any intention to change those allocations now, but they do both need to go to DFT for final sign-off once regionally we've made our decision on those. So there is the possibility there that DFT may still have some comment back, but it's just to provide reassurance that what has been presented to you today is what we consider to be the final position, and we're not suggesting a subsequent change unless advised by the department. The final recommendation is just to note updates on the other funding streams. As I mentioned, there's been a lot that have been floated around over recent months, and this just provides an updated position on all of them, but the focus is on those that we need the approval for subsequent submission to department. The table summarises the variety of programmes with the allocations distributed by lead authority. The 3 columns highlighted in yellow are those that we're asking for the approval of today, so the CRSTS capital and revenue at £66 million and the BSIP at £21 million. There's a number of principles that we've applied in reaching these allocations, and some of those have been a necessity of the timing that we'd be working to. Both have had to be developed very quickly, particularly the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. We were only made aware of the allocation at the end of January this year. We are required to submit a draft programme back to DFT, and the requested date for that is the end of March. So it was essential that it made it into this cycle of meetings so that we were able to provide the governance and provide you with the opportunity to comment on those prior to that March return date. The Bus Services Improvement Plan, we are also required to submit a delivery plan back to the department before the end of this month. So it has been important to develop these proposals at quite a rate in order to get them into this meeting cycle. That development has been done collaboratively between the transport team at EMCCA and the 4 constituent authorities. So this has been an incremental process. We have worked as a working group throughout to reach the agreed position that's being presented to you today. The allocations we're talking about are just for a single year, so they are all for the 25-26 financial year. With the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, that is essentially pulling forward part of our indicative allocation from the period 27 to 32. What is really important for us to do with it this year is to demonstrate our capability to the department, to provide them with the confidence and the reassurance that we are able to use this money well, use it quickly, but use it efficiently and to produce positive benefits, to strengthen our case for a subsequent draw forward for the year 26 to 27. If we're successful in doing that, we essentially then have an investment programme to cover a 7-year period, which is a level of certainty that we haven't had for a considerable amount of time. That will in turn give us the opportunity to look at things from a much more strategic perspective, to start developing some more significant, some more transformative schemes, but also to develop the framework to make sure that all of the investments are built on a much more strategic foundation. There is a strategic approach to what we have at the moment, but as you've seen from the previous paper, the LTP is still in development. There are a number of other papers in the region that we would want our long-term investment plan to relate to, such as the growth plan and the spatial plan, to name just a couple. So the proposal this time around has been developed quite pragmatically, but in future we would be looking for a more structured, a more rigorous assessment process to go through before getting to the point where we're submitting proposals to you. The guidance for CRSTS hasn't been provided by DFT yet because we are talking about early access to a programme that isn't due to start until 2027. What we have agreed with the department is that we will use the guidance for the current CRSTS programme, for which EMCCA hasn't been a recipient, but which other authorities, or the combined authorities in the region have been. So the proposals that have come forward have been based on alignment with that current CRSTS national guidance. We've taken a pragmatic approach. Two key things, essentially, that we want to make sure we achieve with this is addressing the most urgent needs, so the individual priorities of the constituent authorities that were already there and were requiring funding, but also that demonstration of capability and that early delivery, being able to provide visible benefits quite quickly to provide that reassurance. So we've also looked at supporting maintenance programs, active travel investments, smaller scale investments that can be mobilised more quickly, that can start to demonstrate that delivery early on. But as I say, this is a one-year approach. It's that pragmatic approach to meet the current needs. We'll be looking for a much more strategic view later on. The BSIP proposals are slightly different. Each of the constituent authorities already has a BSIP that has been published, and the proposals that have come forward for those have all been based on those existing BSIPs. And so there is that existing strategic framework around which those have been promoted by our constituent authorities. So that's a very quick run through of sort of the justification, the purpose of the report and the background to that.
Thank you, Alex. I'll now open it up for questions. Councillor Clark first, then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, this is very welcome news. To a certain extent, it's a repeat of our discussions at the Investment Committee a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was. But it is very welcome. It allows us to get on with extra spending, in particular in terms of the Nottinghamshire County Council's allocation of £15 million for highways maintenance, which is very much needed and appreciated to boost our spending that we're carrying on already. And also the £7.5 million contribution for the 614, 697 junction improvements, which is also very welcome and very much needed. It does, again, I referred to one of the questioners some time ago about carbon emissions, and in fact, far from, if you like, encouraging car usage, what this is doing is actually helping to, again, reduce carbon emissions, because if you improve the junctions, then the queuing traffic will reduce, or churning out exhaust fumes while they're stationary queuing for the junctions. So this will be very welcome in improving that traffic flow. And before anybody says about speeding, notice I said improving the traffic flow. I didn't say increase the speed of traffic, just to clarify that, Chairman, because obviously vehicles travelling at an optimum speed are far better or far more efficient than standing in a stationary queue, churning out fumes. Alex did mention this is a single year, so would be nice to emphasise that obviously a multi-year settlement would be very preferable and welcomed. So I hope that we are pushing towards that as much as we can and emphasising the need for that. And also, you did use the phrase to use it quickly. Well, in the interest of helping out, Chairman, I've got plenty of space in the boot of my car. I could take the the 15 million and the 7.5 million with me now back to the office to sort of help get things underway rather more quickly than having to wait for it. So anyway, it is very welcome, Chairman, and I hope that this is now the prelude to us getting action underway.
Thank you, Councillor Clarkey. I think Alex wanted to come back.
It's just a comment about the fact that it's a single-year settlement. A lot of the revenue element is being used to develop the pipeline for future schemes, and some of those larger strategic schemes that are listed under the EMCCA element of the programme would go beyond that 12-month period. If we are successful, as we would hope to be in getting that 26-27 year allocation, we do then become in receipt of a multi-year settlement, and so it will be viewed as that from that point onwards.
Good news. Councillor Mellon.
Yes, so obviously good to have some funds to be able to get on with the much needed work. Can I just ask about the distribution of the money? Is it done under the formula that the previous government has had for a few years? I did ask at the last meeting that at EMCCA we might equitable across our both urban and rural districts.
We haven't applied a formula on this occasion, so we haven't reverted to the DFT formula, primarily because of the speed which we needed to turn it around and those two principles that we applied in terms of making sure each authority had got the primary needs that they had. There was quite a variance in scale of what each authority was asking for. So some of the authorities may have asked for a little less than maybe you might have anticipated them getting, but that was based on the deliverability and the capacity to deliver within that first year. We obviously would want to make sure over that prolonged period that there is a fair and reasonable distribution, but that isn't necessarily based on a traditional DFT formula. It's going to be based on that strategic assessment that we do of the schemes and what regionally may be more appropriate to spend the money on.
Thank you. I think Alex has given an exceptionally good answer to the issue about the allocation of the CRSTS funding and the BSIP funding. I think, Councillor Mellon, you were talking about the highways maintenance funding potentially, which is, I think, what your question related to the last time you were here. And I think on the highways maintenance funding, we have kept to the DFT allocations on that we've used in previous years, if I'm correct on that one, Alex. So, thank you.
Assurance that at some point will be examined, because there will be different feelings about that, as was demonstrated at the last meeting.
Yeah, as with some of the questions that were raised in the previous paper, we're open to all advice on how we might better look at things, and we're happy to review and reassess.
Councillor Cummett.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, echo a lot of Councillor Clark's comments in relation specifically to the CRSTS additional funding, and specifically thank the Mayor for listening on landslips. So I'm not sure I could have shouted a lot louder, and equally some of the local communities who are so devastatingly impacted. So thanks on that. But with that note, in relation to the CRSTS funding and noting the quite strong and rightly so deliverability and sort of completion expectations from DFT and from ourselves as well, I'd like to request if specifically the Derbyshire allocations around the retaining walls, landslips and highway maintenance could be put into one, similar I think to the Nottinghamshire allocation in relation to just so putting it under a wider heading of priority highway maintenance schemes, and then perhaps in brackets including landslips and retaining walls. Because I am just, given the lateness of this money coming forwards, like you say, that's not EMCCA's fault, that's sort of been waiting on government. I am slightly concerned, particularly in relation to landslip remedials, that some of them are very time specific in terms of when you can work on site during a year. And I wouldn't want us to, for instance, for one of the landslip ones, if we've got it, we can't start till next April, or if we have a similar shockingly bad summer, which I hope we don't, I wouldn't want us to then be at risk of clawback of that money, where we could actually spend it on the highway and then put it into the landslip, and do it over, for next April, just because it fell into the next financial year. So my request on behalf of sort of Derbyshire would be, both today and then obviously at board, if we could sort of condense that, just to build that flexibility in for that highway maintenance, but with the clear expectation that we are obviously directing it towards landslips, highways maintenance, drainage and retaining walls.
Thank you. That seems reasonable. Is that possible?
Yeah, with applying the current guidance, the CRSS1 guidance that we're using, that would be a local decision, so that we'd be able to make that. The profile that has been developed isn't set in stone, so that was how we agreed with the constituent authorities best to represent the information, but there's nothing that would stop us changing that. The only caveat I would apply to that would be if once DfT have seen our final proposals, if they have any specific requests about how they want to identify a separation between those, but we would still retain local change control mandate, so that wouldn't prevent us, even if we did still have 2 lines within the report, that wouldn't prevent us looking at those 2 as a singular programme and managing that way.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to come back on that, I guess it was for that specific point that we all know from the town deals and from previous government funding that it's quite painful often and quite bureaucratic to have to then amend just to move pots around. So yeah, if you're happy to, and I think from the Derbyshire perspective, having spoken to officers, I think we're happy to condense those into a wider highway maintenance wording to be finalised prior to next week's board. Then I'd be keen to do that.
We'll do just that. Thank you. Councillor Flitter. Did you put your hand up? No? You're on my list anyway. Ralph, then.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously you mentioned it's first year and, timescales are rushed, so things are where they are. But I agree with Councillor Mellon's point around wanting to make sure that we are putting together a proper approach for allocation of these funds in the future. And I think that should be based upon need, but also I think we should be looking at the efficacy in which they're spent, because spending this money quickly and having a good effect might not be the best spend of these funds. Something that looks pretty and it gets great public opinion initially, but then degrades in 3 years' time, is not necessarily the best use of these funds if we could fix something for much longer term. So what are we doing around making sure that as we go forward with this process, that we are encouraging the constituent authorities to embracing innovation, but then are then sharing best practice across all of the organisations so that we can get good efficacy that consistently across the region?
And just with the first point, when I've talked about spending quickly, still very much spending it well as well. It's not just about spending it quickly. It's just identifying those things that can be done to that high level that they need to be, but as quickly as possible. In terms of the future approach, we would be working with all 4 constituent authorities to develop the framework in which we assess and prioritise future investments. One of the things you mentioned there was sort of previous efficacy. That would be part of the deliverability question. No, it's not just, is this scheme deliverable? Yes or no. We'd obviously need to understand the capacity, the capability and previous demonstration of that. We haven't got that framework in place at the moment. It is very much one of the next stages of development we need to do as a region to establish that more structured and strategic process to do that. But as with a lot of points that have been made today, the knowledge, the expertise of the constituent authorities will be key in doing that. It's a collaborative piece of work. It's not something we do centrally and then impose on the authorities. It's something that we will build together with your officers to make sure that we are capturing all of those points that are specific to each individual authority.
Anthony?
Thanks, Chair. Well, similar to Councillor Colbert, I welcome the sort of extra funding around landslips, etc. I'm just thinking particularly with 1 or 2 of those key routes, and to my mind, the A57 probably is definitely one of those that should be counted as a strategic route. Is there an additional approach that's needed? Because whilst the money's increased a lot this year, I still don't think that's necessarily going to be enough to sort of put in place a long-term solution for that. And I think for me, there's a bit of a call for, not quite a Midlands Connect sort of type approach, but some sort of, save the A57 longer term plan, particularly given that, to a certain extent, in parallel with the Woodhead it's one of those key routes that it sort of doesn't quite feature on the national agenda, but I think it probably should, because the expectation of funding it solely from the resources that we're getting as a region, I think don't take into account the significance of the route. Thanks, Chair.
The Mayor will respond.
So I would agree with that point, and it's obviously strategically important for neighbouring regions in terms of that corridor between Sheffield and Manchester. And if our neighbouring mayors and their regions wish to grow and connect better, they have to do it in partnership with ourselves, because they'll have to come through the East Midlands region. So I am seeking a meeting of the other two mayors and their officers, because I do think there is an opportunity to discuss how we place this particular route onto a more heightened level in terms of that strategic priority across the three regions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was just a quick question about comms. This is really good news. How are we going to promote this once it's approved at the main committee? Because I think it's really important that people ask what a difference a mayor makes, and I think this is exactly what it is. This is just one element of it. There's so many different ones. I think people have been waiting for a long time to kind of see the impacts of what Mayor Clare kind of will have, and I think we just need to make sure that we cover this in good comms and working with the local authorities at the same time, so we put it out on different channels.
Yes, we're getting a nod. Councillor Peacock.
So thank you, Chair. I want to welcome the commitment from within the investment plan as well, particularly from my point of view, the A614, A6097 major road network scheme. Just for a brief history for people that in this room that don't know, in 2018, the then Transport Secretary Chris Grayling announced an £18 million government commitment to this particular scheme, which was at the time a £36 million scheme. He cited it as being shovel ready, and that was in 2018. Since then, the failure to carry out this scheme has restricted growth in some of our more deprived areas, certainly our former coalfield areas along that route, in particular Ollerton and Edwinstowe, where employment land has not been able to come on stream because of the failure to enact this scheme, as well as slowing down the building of a new primary school and much needed primary school, and restricting housing development numbers as well. And that's only in two parts of this route that I know of. So the question for me is simply that we're making that commitment of £7.5 million for 25-26. How much control do we have about the pace of the works that's needed? In particular, how much control do we have over the pace of enlarging Ollerton Roundabout, which is the pinch point in terms of the employment land development and housing regeneration within the Ollerton and Edwinstowe areas?
Thank you, Councillor Peacock. Before I bring officers in, Councillor Clark indicated...
Well, thanks, Chairman. Just in response to Councillor Peacock's comments, he talked about shovel ready. It's still shovel ready. We're very grateful for the £7.5 million. All we need now is the government to finally confirm their contribution, and it's underway, and shovels will be in the ground. So we're just waiting for the government to sign the cheque.
Marvellous. Alex.
I think Councillor Clark's covered it mostly. The £7.5 million was a gap in funding that was required. Without that in place, there wouldn't have been a position that DFT could have considered. Hopefully now that that funding is in place, that has overcome one of the final obstacles that will then allow them to look at the business case. And then, as Councillor Clark has said, that then puts the scheme in a position where it can move faster than it has done previously.
Thank you. Councillor Peacock.
Yeah, the fanfare in 2018 was all about a scheme being ready and shovel ready. And again, the anxiety is that the local people have been waiting for this before 2018, if I'm honest, and it should have been done before 2018. But the problem is now is we've got employment land ready to go in and around the A614 in particular, and that's waiting for these improvements. Can we make sure, can the Mayor's office push forward to make sure that those things begin in 25-26 if we're offering the money up? And what I will say as well is developers have already contributed their part, their money towards these schemes as well, and they're very frustrated because they've committed and they've handed over their funding for this scheme, and they're now restricted in terms of letting out their employment land, which in essence is costing investment in that area.
I think we can, as a committee, work together through the Mayor's office to lobby the government to unlock the rest of the funding, can't we? To get on with it. The project's ready to go. We just need the extra funding, so I'm sure we can do that. All right. Can I just ask about the retention of the 25% and how local authorities can unlock that? What mechanisms in place for local authorities to unlock that 25%?
Currently, we haven't had the advice from DFT on what the mechanism is going to be for unlocking that 25%. Just to clarify, the 25% only relates to the uplifted amount. So it's 25% of 22 million, not 25% of 75 million. We are in regular dialogue with colleagues from the department to secure that information. Been unable to provide it as of yet due to, understandably, ministerial sign-off of higher priority items, but we would expect to get that information as soon as possible to enable us then to share that information with constituent authorities and understand what we're going to need to do as a region to ensure we do unlock that.
Super, thank you. The recommendations which you have seen, is everyone in favour of those? Marvellous, thank you. I think that's it. Thank you very much. That's the end, thanks.